In fact, I will make this following statement. If Saga Esports somehow manage to get into the playoffs, I will shake my head completely clean. And I mean that. I'll do it.
40 seconds remaining in the round. Tries to open up more of an avenue. And Razor lost his battle to Machine. And it's all down to Kaken into 1v3 to avoid elimination. Plant going down from Machine, and the GG called out early by Syro. He's seen enough, and now into the post plant. Kaken could not find the planter. He can't find anything right now. But he has to make his move. Desperately seeking for an advantage to make it a 1v2. And he does do that with the kill onto Ned. It's not GG just yet, and a chance to get the kill onto Machine. But he stays alive on the sliver of health and gives Loyal then the chance to get the dagger of the kill. Dream Warriors knocked out of playoffs by True Synergy Gaming, who booked their place in the coming week.
Well, that got closer than I had anticipated. After one of the best competitive stages we've had in OCE since we formally were introduced as our own region back in 2023, we may have just had one of the strangest. With only 7 teams competing this stage thanks to Gaming Gladiators deciding to bail on Siege, again, it really became a bottom 3 shootout to see who would miss out on the playoffs for Stage 2, as well as the group stage effectively being seeding matches for the playoff bracket. Despite that, there were some real stakes coming into the stage, namely the APL Major Qualifier at PAX Melbourne a fortnight ago, as well as the APL Regional Finals later in the year in early to mid-December. Some teams improved from last stage, others stagnated, and a couple just disappeared. Literally. And with the regular season done for most of these teams, it's time to talk about how Stage 2 went for some of these teams and what lies in store for them for the rest of the year. Starting with the only team to miss out on playoffs, the roster formerly known as Saga Esports. Thank God. I didn't find out this roster would be going under Dream Warriors until after I dropped my preview and made my declaration about going bold if Saga made playoffs, which was also the same time that the roster got a total revamp, dropping Version, Crine, and Ray, bringing in Kaken, Reelers, and Eraser. And when they won their first game at Guild Outlast, I may or may not have started fearing for my hair. Unfortunately, it was not to be, as they would not win another point for the rest of the stage. However, to Dream Warriors' credit, they were a far more competitive roster this stage with their revamp, with most of their losses being 7-4 or 7-5. Dream Warriors actually started to push the majority of teams to play their best. They weren't pushover by any means, and their individual stats were backed up by that as well, with one notable exception. Freelo. He was the worst rated player in OCE in Stage 2 and barely had any kind of a meaningful impact during games. And that's the thing with esports like Siege, Counter-Strike, League, take your pick. If one player on your team is consistently falling behind, then the rest of the team is dragged down. I was going to make a joke about Team Falcon's Counter-Strike roster, but it would just be long-hanging fruit at this point. So, what's next for DW? Well, their 2025 season is effectively done. They've got no more Tier 1 games for the rest of the year, and the next chance they have to make a name for themselves is at SI Quals during January. But the big thing with these guys is they need to sharpen up their skills. If they want to stick with this lineup going into 2026, assuming they survive relegation, then they have to get their fundamentals in order. Strategy, communication, the whole 9 yards. Getting an org to back them is going to help them with their endeavors, but it is not going to be the be-all, end-all. They have to better themselves if they want to be better. There is potential in this roster. We saw it during Stage 2. Let's hope that these guys stick together and come back better and stronger for 2026. Now, with these next 2 teams, we actually don't know their final placings at the time of recording, which can be explained one of 2 ways. Either the results simply haven't been released yet, or they actually haven't played yet. In either case, I'm going to lump the 2 of them together here and talk about them at the same time, mainly just to keep things quick and easy. Beginning with True Synergy Gaming, and okay, I might have been a little bit overzealous with my power ranking predictions, as I had these guys coming in 3rd. And they ended up in 5th, 6th. yet again showing that I don't know jack shit. Which was made even more apparent when TSG would lose their first 3 games in a row against the Chiefs, Ludovica, and Outlast. They did manage to win their first match against Man LFO, who were on a bit of a roll at the time, but when it came to that match against Enterprise, I think a new record was set. The fastest loss in OCE history.
Seconds kit in a bad spot as well from where these two players are located. There's just no time to salvage this. ACOG goes down. It's the first 7-0 of the group stage for OCE.
It's a done deal for EP. GG's in the chat.
Enterprise utterly dismantled them on Cafe in a 7-0 clinic. The highest rated player in that game, Ned, for TSG at least, had an EPS rating of 78. I'll let that sink in for just a second. Finally, we come to the final game of groups against Dream Warriors, which was essentially an elimination game for the last one playoffs. And although DW got close, TSG ended up winning it out 7-4. So while they got the wins they need to progress, the playoffs campaign was less than successful. Though, in fairness to TSG, matching up against the Chiefs in the first round of the upper bracket, that was never going to go well. However, their one and only match in the lower bracket showed signs of improvement with this roster, pushing Man LFO to overtime on 2 separate maps, and even winning one of them. However, it wasn't enough to get the actual win they needed to stay alive in the playoffs, ending their 2025 campaign with one hell of a fight, I'll give them that much. I think during the offseason, TSG needed to take some time to find an identity, something that they can build around and is unique to them, whether it be a star player, their strategy book, or just team culture in general. They need to find what works best for them because they feel kind of listless at the moment. However, given that this is still a new-ish roster to the region and this current roster is still relatively fresh-faced rookies, that's not necessarily a bad thing. I don't think they've quite got all the pieces in place, but there is no real cause for concern at the moment. They've had some good moments in 2025, but they've not been able to capitalize on the scoreboard when it matters. Going into SI quals in January next year and into season 2026, again assuming they survive relegation, I think there is enough potential to put the rest of the league on notice, if they get the right people in place to fill any gaps they have. Definitely a case of watch this space. With Ludovica, this is the one team I feel went backwards. Whether it be down to their own form or the other teams around them getting better, these guys were not able to replicate their Stage 1 results, despite them being 2 rounds away from going to the regional finals later in the year. Keeping their roster unchanged from their surprise second placing and last stage, Ludovica began their campaign with a round 1 bye and a 7-2 loss to Enterprise in round 2. Despite their slow start, they would bounce back and win their remaining games, including an overtime win over the Chiefs in round 6. However, I kind of want to focus in on round 7 because a lot of things hinge on the results of those games, including Ludovica qualifying for the APL regional finals at the end of the year. For context, the way teams qualify for regional finals is their results across both competitive stages, which makes complete and total sense, except it only takes group stages into account. It doesn't include the results from playoffs. For the APL specifically, the first 2 teams across all 3 subdivisions would earn a spot at the APL finals in December. Enterprise had their spot already booked, so it came down to the Chiefs and Ludovica on the final playday. And with the Chiefs having their bye in the final round, it was down to Ludovica to make their own fate. All they had to do was win against Man LFO in regulation to book their spot into December. Man LFO forced overtime to deny Ludovica a regional finals berth, despite losing 8-6. Ludovica still ended the group stage in second and earned themselves a first round bye in the playoffs. But this would be the only good thing to come out of their playoffs run. Their first match was against the Chiefs, who they lost to in a quickfire 2-0. Ludovica were on the back foot going into their lower bracket match against Outlast, who themselves were on the receiving end of a 2-0 loss. And to make it even worse for Luda, their coach Twent had to sub in for Lunchbox in that match. Despite that, they were able to push Outlast to map 3, but would end up losing the final map of Lab in overtime, treating us all to a mini crash out from Cairo. While it was unfortunate for Ludovica to have to play with a sub in their final game, This feels like a missed opportunity to cement themselves among the best of OCE. Coming in second during groups is all well and good, and I commend them for that. But if you can't make the most of the advantage you've been given because you place well enough in groups, then it's effort and energy wasted. And I know that Ludovic are not the first team to get top seed in groups and then bomb out in playoffs. There are plenty of cases of it happening in SI's past. But I feel this is a bit more egregious given the context of this stage in particular. Assuming that they don't get relegated from the OCE League next season, which I'm fairly certain they won't, they have to get their nerves under wraps and be able to seize big moments if they want to get better and more consistent results. In terms of personnel, I don't believe there's anything that needs to change, but they have to get tighter with their playstyle. Coming in fourth place is Man LFO, who came together after half the Circular Spheres roster got picked up by Outlast. And for a team that came together about a month before the season was due to start, they did pretty damn well, all things considered. Getting fifth with only 2 wins in a 7-team group stage may not seem all that impressive, especially when it's the top 6 that make it into the playoffs. But keep in mind that Oceania was actually fairly competitive this stage, and their final placement in the group stage still mattered in terms of seeding for the playoffs. And yes, while Man LFO's results weren't all that great in terms of their win-loss record, their round difference actually wasn't too bad with a -7. And just for context, the 2 teams that finished below them, TSG and Dream Warriors, had round differences of -10 and -13 respectively. That should tell you how close the bottom half of the league was. But for Man LFO, their defining moment would actually come during the playoffs, where they were a hair's breadth away from pulling off the upset of the stage, maybe even the season. After beating Outlast 2-0 in the upper bracket grand finals, they would get matched up against OCE's reigning champions of Enterprise. Many people had pegged EP as the easy victors. That was until Man LFO took EP's map of Cafe Dostoyevsky 7-5. That was unexpected. Man LFO had the chance to do something really special on their map pick of Consulate. And although they ended up losing the map and ultimately the series, holy fuck did they get close.
Cover both the main door and rotational push. There are no C4s in pockets, and they should know that. So if the coverage is good and they can get a little bit more vert, but that's the issue. They don't have any self-destruction. Beneath the hatch, Fisho lurks. 1v3 for Pluto.
It's an impossible position for him, and they know exactly where he is. The Kings may stumble, but they will not fall. Enterprise dig deep and bounce back, getting it done in 3 maps. Man LFO, they did the closest thing that any team in the region has done for quite some time, but they could not finish the job.
Man LFO gets sent down to the lower bracket and play TSG in order to stay alive in the playoffs. And although TSG pushed them to overtime on map 3 of Cafe, Man LFO were just a little bit too good. Their final match of the playoffs was a rematch against Outlast from the upper bracket quarterfinal, but this time, it was the Reapers who got the last laugh, ending the August roster's playoff run and their 2025 season as well. So, what's next for these guys? In terms of manpower, not all that much. Hunter, Scars, and Pluto have all been around the block a few times, and they're pretty consistent throughout. In only his second stage in the top flight of Siege, Sharky actually had a marked improvement this stage compared to last stage when he was with Outlast. And Beers actually did some pretty solid work in his official debut, putting in some solid if somewhat inconsistent numbers. Sally is cooking something here. I feel there is some serious potential in 2026. I hope these guys put in a deep run for the LCQ next year, if only just to boost their confidence going into the next season. And now for the biggest surprise packet of Stage 2, Outlast. From missing out on the playoffs last stage to lower bracket finalists this time out, consider me impressed. After dropping half of their roster and picking up the core of the Circular Spheres roster, Outlast were looking to make a statement after their Stage 1 ended with some drama on social media that led to Bake, Darks, and Sharky getting dropped from Outlast will lose 7-2 on Chalet against Dream Warriors. Not the start they were hoping for. And although they pushed the New Look Chiefs all the way to round 15 on Bank, they would ultimately lose out to the more experienced roster. They would eventually get their first win against TSG in overtime on Chalet, but they would only get one more win during groups against Man LFO, which would tie them on 7 points with both Man and TSG. And thanks to their round difference being the best of the 3, they would actually get the best seeding going into playoffs, which they would lose against Man LFO 2-0. However, keep in mind that Bailey is subbed in for Neptune for that match, so I wouldn't put too much stock in that. So now they're in the lower bracket and fighting for their lives. They get matched up against the runners-up of last stage, Ludovica. Many were expecting Ludovica to bounce back after losing to the Chiefs the day before. Outlast had other ideas.
He lost this out to Milo. It's down to Neptune and Milo into the 1v1. Neptune with the red ping, the old head versus the young gunner. Milo quiet all day, but might just make it his moment. It will not. It's Neptune, of course. Oh, bloody fucking hell, of course it is.
After missing the previous match, Neptune responded with one of his best individual performances and helped push his team over the line in a 2-1 nail-biter against Ludovica, earning MVP honors twice. And running on the back of that kind of momentum, it wouldn't surprise anyone that Outlast got the last laugh over Man LFO in a 2-0 demolition in the lower bracket semifinals. However, they would suffer the same fate as Man in the lower bracket final, as they would bow out in a 2-0 loss against the Chiefs, just missing out on the APL major qualifier. Outlast had what I would describe as a roller coaster of a 2025 season. They came into stage 1 on a wave of momentum after coming second in OCE Challenger Series, only to essentially rage quit the final games in groups and miss out on playoffs altogether. They then drop half their roster, pick up half the former CS roster as well as their manager in Dr. Scap, start stage 2 incredibly slowly with back-to-back losses, and ended up finishing the stage in 3rd overall. They not only met expectations going into stage 2, but far exceeded them. I mean, I had them going out in the first round of the lower bracket based on their stage 1 performance. I said this on social media after Outlast got eliminated, and I will say it here. I can't wait to see what these boys do during the offseason, and I hope that 2026 goes so much better for them. Now, before we get to the top 2, there's a little bit of housekeeping I need to attend to. Firstly, both teams in the top 2 qualified for the APL Major Qualifier that took place at PAX Melbourne earlier in the month, to differing degrees of success. So we will talk about their results here as well. Secondly, and most importantly, they also qualified to the APL Regional Finals happening later in the year. So they both get a chance to earn additional points to qualify for the 6th Invitational next year, as well as another shot at a direct invite to Paris before the LCQs in January. So there's still a little bit to play out for both teams during 2025. However, only one team from Oceania is going to the Munich Major. I'll let you take a guess which one. Enterprise came into this stage on a wave of momentum after coming first in OCE Challenger Series, claiming the OCE crown for stage 1, and flying to Riyadh for the Esports World Cup. They would even win their first 3 matches against Ludovica, Man LFO, and Dream Warriors in convincing fashion. Enterprise were on a roll. And then they came up against the Chiefs in Clubhouse, where they get systematically dismantled.
Player held his position, but the rest of Chiefs will hold theirs on site. Sage may have looked like Brendo in the earlier graphic, but he certainly played like his brother in this game. Chiefs absolutely tear to shreds the best team in the region.
After their mid-stage bye, EP would come up against TSG, who had just gotten their first win of the stage against Man LFO the previous playday. And in what might be the fastest game in OCE Siege history, EP destroyed TSG 7-0 on Cafe, all but confirming their playoff status in the process. Their first matchup in the second round of the playoffs was against Man LFO, where they were handed their first playoffs map loss in the first map. Being pushed to overtime on map 2 was not ideal for the boys, but they rallied and got the win they needed. They would then play the same team in back-to-back games, winning the upper bracket final in convincing fashion, but losing the grand final 2-1. However, that is not the end. So remember how I said that the top 2 teams would compete as part of the APL Major Qualifier to book a spot to Munich next month, and that only one team would make it into the top 4? Well, that team was Enterprise. After a grueling first day that saw them play 6 maps over the course of, 15 hours. I'll explain more when I do my Munich Major preview. But the gist of it is, the games started at about 9 AM Australian Eastern, and didn't finish until 4 AM the next morning. And Enterprise survived that marathon, They would lose their first map on stage against Weibo, but they were done by that point. They got what they came for. With Munich right around the corner and regional finals on the horizon, Enterprise's season is far from done. But now the true test is on. Can they prove themselves against some of the world's best? Yes, they now will have international experience thanks to them going to EWC. But Mingoran and Fisho Guy have to get the rest of these boys ready for what is essentially unexplored territory for them. If they can do well at Munich and meet the expectations set before them, then I'll consider this a pass mark going into regional finals. Anything after that is icing on the cake. Which just leaves us with the returning kings of OCE, who got a revamp thanks to adding Brendo and Sage on during the mid-season break. The Chiefs are back on top. Swapping out Tex and Josh for Brendo and Sage after the GG's sudden collapse, which in turn reunited the brothers with former Bliss teammates Oda and Jigsaw, as well as Sage and Quiz being former teammates on Knights back in the day, the Chiefs were looking to make a statement going into Stage 2. And while they did, it was not as strong as they would have liked. After putting TSG to bed in round 1, Chiefs would get pushed to overtime against Outlast in round 2, and would lose outright to Man LFR in round 3. Something wasn't quite clicking. Jigsaw was going gangbusters like he always does, but the rest of the team around him wasn't quite picking up the slack. At least not consistently. However, in round 4, Chiefs really kicked into gear, and would dispatch both Enterprise and Dream Warriors back-to-back in incredibly convincing fashion. Then came their final match against Ludovica, one which would ultimately shape not only the rest of the stage, but also help shape the rest of the season too. Enterprise had already locked in their spot for the regional finals, so it was down to Chiefs and Ludovica, and remember, the top 2 from each subdivision would play in December. Chiefs were in the driver's seat. All they had to do was win, and they were in. They would end up falling short in overtime instead, and now their fate was no longer in their hands, as they had their bye in the final round. However, because of that loss in overtime, that put the pressure on Ludovica in their final game, and we already know what happened there. So despite not being in the top 2, Chiefs entered the playoffs in good spirits, sending both TSG and Ludovica down to the lower bracket in quick succession. And I do mean quick succession, dropping only 6 rounds in each match. That sets up the upper bracket final against Enterprise, but would end up getting sent down to the lower bracket, matching up against Outlast in the lower bracket final, and making quick work of the Reapers. And now we come to the grand final, a rematch of the upper bracket final against Enterprise. After taking each other's respective map picks of Bank and Border, it all came down to Cafe, and the Chiefs put their foot on EP's throat and did not let up, despite Enterprise's best efforts to mount a comeback.
20 seconds remain. Jigsaw repositions, aggressive in bar. Enterprise poise. But again, the Mute Jammers protect these defenders. Coming in from behind, Tuhan is spotted. Chiefs are standing up.
10 seconds.
The Clash finally taken down, but Relays is eliminated. Fisho Guy must now plant. And Bappen, who's clutched time and time again, he has to cover.
Where's the plant?
But the Kingdom of OCE will return home. EP were merely the caretakers.
Ultimately, after a thrilling series in a newly formed rivalry, the Chiefs reclaimed their crown as OCE champions. However, there was one last thing for the Chiefs to deal with: the APL Major Qualifier. After a brutal day at the office for all teams involved, the 4 teams heading to Munich were confirmed. Unfortunately, the Chiefs were not in the top 4, but they did get close, and they should be commended for toughing it out in a game that didn't finish until 4 AM in the morning. That is proper mental strength. So while the Chiefs are not going to Munich next month, they still have the regional finals in December. One final chance to score points and increase their chances at qualifying for the 6th Invitational in February. And while they may not be as well placed as Enterprise will be in terms of global standings, the Chiefs have their own advantage compared to EP. They get a longer rest. Not much of a consolation prize, I know, but they did play their guts out of Melbourne despite the circumstances, and I don't think they'll fall under the pressure of the regional finals. But everyone has to step up a gear if they want to qualify for Paris. Even Jigsaw. The challenge is laid out for him. Let's hope they're up for it. That's all from me. What did you guys think of Stage 2? And what was your favorite moment from the OCE this stage? Drop a comment below. And if you like the video, please hit that like button. If you want to see more of my videos in the future, feel free to subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications so you get alerted when my next video drops. I'm debating whether or not to do a watch party for the entirety of the Munich Major. It just comes down to what times the games will be for here in Australia, especially those in the West. But I am still going to be doing my preview and prediction videos for Munich, as well as the APO regional finals in December. So keep an eye on those in the coming weeks and months. And I'm also cooking up something that's a bit longer in length, which I'm targeting for a mid to late January release. So keep your eyes peeled for that one. Until next time, operators, this is your resident Silverwolf, signing off.